This is Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company located in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for joining us for our first podcast series discussing C.S. Lewis's popular tale, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the second of 7 stories in the Chronicles of Narnia. This Christmas, Ninth Hour is presenting a live theatrical production of this beloved classic. For more information, visit our website, ninthhour.ca. That's number 9th-hour.ca, or follow the links in the description. In this podcast series, we thought it would be interesting to discuss The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in more detail, to not only deepen and enrich yours and our understanding of this favorite story, but for the sheer pleasure of it. We also think you'll enjoy getting an insider's look at many of the artistic and production decisions that Ninth Hour Theatre Company makes in putting together this show. So, grab a drink and a favorite snack, maybe some Turkish Delight, and settle in for a stimulating ride into the wardrobe and the world of theater magic. Welcome to episode 5 of Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring arts and culture, faith and spirituality. I'm joined today with 3 guests. First, my co-host, George Dutch. George studied acting at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver with internationally renowned theater director Gunduz Kalik during the 70s. Then joined his ensemble in Northern Australia for 5 years, where he taught a performance class in a university theater program during the 80s. George was director of the drama ministry at Dominion Chalmers United Church in the 2000s. He's been part of Ninth Hour since its inception, doing dramaturgy, directing, acting, and helping with the business operations of the company. He played the beloved Mr. Beaver in Ninth Hour's 2018 production, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. George thinks theater should investigate big ideas related to the role of culture in shaping everyday practices of living. Welcome, George. Thanks for joining me again.
I'm happy to be back.
Next up, we've got a brand new guest, Jacob Segreto. Jacob has been with Ninth Hour Theatre Company since 2017, appearing in multiple productions, including Prodigal Son and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as Edmund. After graduating from Immaculata High School in Ottawa this past spring, Jacob is now in his first year at the University of Ottawa, majoring in psychology with hopes of becoming a clinical psychologist. On top of school, Jacob also works in customer service with the City of Ottawa. Welcome, Jacob, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great. And our third guest today, a returning guest, is Todd Anderson. Todd is a principal of Augustine College, which is a classical Christian post-secondary institution in downtown Ottawa. He is a PhD candidate at Carleton University. Todd explores the Anglo-Latin poetry of George Herbert, but also has a deep love for C.S. Lewis and has written on his poetry and Perlandra. Todd also serves on the board of elders at Calvary Baptist Church in Ottawa and lives with his wife Heather and their 6 children in Canada. Welcome back, Todd.
Yeah, great to be here, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
I thought we would start off by having our audio engineer tell us a little bit about what the title of this podcast is all about. We're calling it Turkish Delight. And I thought we'd start off with our host, Nigel, telling us a bit more about what Turkish Delight even is, maybe a bit of its origins, and maybe his relationship with Turkish Delight as well. So Nigel, I'm going to pass the mic over to you for a few minutes and give us a bit of a lowdown on that.
Hey, Charlie. Thanks for that. Whoa, nice to be in the seat for a change. In my own living room. Bare Bones Studios. Yeah, Turkish Delight. It's a fun thing. It exists in England. I grew up in England, spent 22 years there. And as a kid, I frequented many candy stores. In fact, having a blazer, like a jacket, going to school with 2 pockets on the side. They were always filled with junk, pear drops, gobstoppers, I don't know what else, licorice, lots of licorice. But of course, Turkish Delight. Now, no self-respecting 7-Eleven equivalent hole-in-the-wall sweet shop in England would be without Turkish Delight. And of course, we always figured, now, what is this stuff? You know, it's kind of gooey, it's covered in chocolate. And after, you know, the Turkish, what is it, the exoticness of it all wears off, 3 bites in, you've got the sugar burn on the throat and wishing you'd never started, never opened up the wrapper, you know. You know, they always had this air of, what's the word, classiness. So suddenly, you know, how we are as Brits, always trying to appear like we're on a higher class somehow. So, sherbet and gobstoppers and those kind of candies were just maybe more reserved for working class. I don't know. I mean, I hate to sound that way, but it is a bit like that in England. So, but as soon as you opened up the Turkish Delight, well, then, you know, you're maybe part of maybe it's left over by the whole colonizing thing that England was a part of so much. That's what I say we. I am a Canadian citizen now, but I was born in England, so it's one of my homes. So I can say something we brought back from the colonies was Turkish Delight. So there you go.
And do you like it?
Do I like it? Yeah, I kind of like the first couple of bites, and then that's enough. You know, that's enough. It's not a it's just like okay, that's sweet enough. I think I'm going for the Miss Vicky's potato chips next.
Well, let's hear from Jacob
I'm
now.
out of here.
Because, he had to eat Turkish Delight when he played the role of Edmund in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in 2018. Did you like it, Jacob?
It was good. I think I'm very lucky that when a part of, you know, playing Edmund, I had to eat it. So it was I was lucky enough to actually enjoy it when we started the run of the show. But by the end, I was a bit sick of it. The stuff that we had, the powder was just everywhere, right? And it was in that box.
Right.
And they'd open that box, and I would have to shove like at least 3 pieces in my mouth per night. So I haven't had it in years, since 2018. So if I ate it now, I think I would like it for a bit, but I probably could not handle the amount I had during the show. Yes, I had.
Make it as much fun.
No, it's just it's like it's like a cube of gelatin essentially. That's what I remember it as, with just like coated in powder.
With powder. Yeah.
And it was like, and I remember
Powdered sugar.
Powdered sugar. And I remember by like, I know the 7th show I had like a mental game of like, the green one isn't the best, so I'm gonna have yellow. And
there were different colors.
Yeah, different colors and flavors. But yeah,
you had favorite colors, like
I was like, I had the yellow during the matinee today. I'm not doing that again. We're doing the green, you know. But yeah, not something I really look back on and miss.
Actually lemon flavored?
Oh God, I could not tell you. Probably. I hope. I mean, oh God, banana? No, it was probably lemon.
I wonder. Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably lemon.
That's too funny to get a bit of an inside scoop on eating it so much.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think I've had like one in my entire life.
Yeah.
And you've had more than you can count.
Well, I think I had a bit of a sweet tooth as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, after hearing what Nigel said, like, I don't remember it being super duper sweet.
Right.
So it might have been like a bit Canadianized. They might have changed it a bit.
Right. And you were just doing what the director told you to do, probably.
Yep. If they were in the box, I would eat them.
There you go.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, that's right. So Jacob, it's great to have Jacob with us. 5 years later, he played Edmund Pevensie in the 2018 production, and boy, was he good. If you didn't see that, the physicality and the acting itself, he's just one of the best, and he was just able to really convey the character arc of Edmund, which is one of the most interesting character arcs of the whole play, which we'll dig into in our conversation today. And what about you, Todd? Before we move on from this subject matter, what about you in Turkish Delight?
Yeah, so I've had a few versions of it. I've eaten it in England, which it is a bit different than here in Canada. I feel like it's juicier across the pond, but maybe Nigel can correct me. I haven't had it in a long time either, so maybe I won't like it. But I also, after a few bites, really don't like the taste. And actually, I just don't like that jello-y consistency.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what I mean, but I mean, Edmund sure does. Although one of the interesting things, that the parallels between our conversation here and what happens in the story is Edmund's sense that this stuff is gross eventually. You know,
Right.
it becomes this symbol of too much or excess, and he can't quite come to grips with why. But that's sort of maybe your experience too as an actor.
Yep.
Again, another one and another showing, and he's back there like holding his breath and drinking water, hoping I got to do it again.
Give you more Turkish Delight if you do the show one more time. No thanks.
Precisely.
And George, your relationship with Turkish Delight?
I tried it once and I just hated it. I couldn't stand that gelatin core and the sweetness, the overpowering sugariness of it all.
Oh, well, on that note, we want to dig further into... we named the episode Turkish Delight for fun, but it also represents something. It was the thing that first hooked Edmund into going with the White Witch, among other things, some other promises and things like that, some other treats. But Turkish Delight's sort of the fun one that we all seem to remember. And we kind of want to explore, you know, basically the role of Edmund and the character of Edmund and why Edmund does certain things, why it was easy for the witch to manipulate Edmund, perhaps why would that be? There's just so much to explore, and I'm happy to kick it off with you, Todd, to sort of give us some sort of introductory thoughts about the role of Edmund, what does Edmund represent in the story, and just kind of your initial thoughts in general.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Edmund's really that first problem or thorn that is going to follow these characters all the way through, and he becomes the main site of the transformation of the human condition, if you like, where a person who has been bad is made good, to put it more bluntly. But what I love about this character is Lewis had tried out a number of others, and he later in other books tried out a number of other bad characters. What does it mean? What kind of person is this? And I'm fascinated to hear how you acted, Edmund, as we talk through this conversation, because unlike some of the other characters, even within the story, like Eustace, you know, he becomes this dragon, he's sort of this pesky kid, but he's a different sort of evil. And so we're going to probably trace a little bit today. What is it about that is central to Edmund as this bad character, and how is it that the witch sort of takes that and amplifies it and makes it far worse? So the thing I was thinking about today was how does Edmund begin in this story? And one of the very first lines that we get about him is about him pretending not to be tired. And I'll just read it for you just at the beginning. He says, "Oh, come off it," he's replying to Susan, said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. Don't go on talking like that. And these two pieces to Edmund's character, that he is pretending all the time, and he seems to be, for most of the book, bad-tempered. I think that's a great place to start. And what does it mean that the witch eventually is going to take hold of those character traits and really use them and manipulate them to undo a lot of what the children are doing?
Yeah, I love that. And certainly Jacob was pretend to be tired.
Right.
You know, as an actor in that role. Do you remember you sort of Edmund in Act 1, you know, sort of what it was like to play kind of like an unlikable, pouty, annoying character that sets the tone in the story, and really people just, including his siblings, are like rolling their eyes at him. And yet you did it so well, of course. But do you remember your thoughts about playing such a character at that age, especially?
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, honestly. To be able to express yourself not through like happiness and excitement, but to really dive in, and I had a bunch of fun. And at the time I was 14, so I have learned so much now that if I went back I would do so much. But at that point, diving into the character and really like figuring out, you know, trying to piece together why he's lying and why he has why he's influenced to just be for lack of better words, like just a brat. Like
Right.
what you know, because
Almost intentionally.
yeah, exactly.
Like refusing to just cooperate,
exactly,
you know?
refusing to, and leaving the Beaver's home. That was a part of the first act. Like he is a complex character essentially,
yeah.
but he's also how I tried to portray him is that he was also the pathway, how everyone would for the characters. He kind of set the tone, and I think it's just difficult. He was just a really complex character, and I tried to, with the best of knowledge that I had, use his temperament not as a tool of just for the fun of it. I really tried to figure out why he was like that,
Right, you were
figure it
exploring
out.
the motivations, yeah. And we talk so much about it, right? Like we get, we as we always do in productions, we try to get to why characters are doing what they're doing instead of just presenting it with no understanding, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think Edmund was probably the most difficult characters I had to play, because he had a lot of character development essentially, and you have to, as a person acting a character, look at both point A, point C, and also point B, the middle part, to see when the change. So it was just he's complex, but I loved him. And looking back, I love like the complex characters.
Yeah, everyone loves him. That's the thing. And he's the most. We spoke in an earlier episode. He's the relatable character. He's the human, real character.
Absolutely, he's not the heroic saving everybody. Like
he does eventually.
Well, essentially, yeah. But I guess at the beginning, like C.S. Lewis just wrote his character extremely well. Like if I were to read it now and read Edmund, I'd be like, yeah, this guy has no hope. Yeah. That his transformation is incredible.
Which of course, like the whole story collapses without that. Like Aslan replacing Edmund's death on the stone table. What we have now, it's almost like that's the pinnacle of the sacrificial love aspect.
Yeah, there's a shallowness about Edmund's character that most kids, when they read the story, respond to in the quote-unquote right way. They don't like him. They think, this guy is, as you said, a brat.
Yeah.
What is this character? He's doing the wrong things. He shouldn't be treating Lucy that way. Look at him. He's cruel. He's mean. But as adults, you look back and you see, when you read it again, wow, I see what he's doing here, that Lewis has captured something that is so real to life, even though it's in this imaginative space, but is capturing something true about the human condition. And there's a respect that, we can present to Lewis for doing that work on our behalf. It's hard to write a character that's bad, right? And I don't know if you've ever tried to be creative, but that's a difficult thing to do. And to capture not just a bad character, capital E evil, but someone who has this combination of shallowness. But he's still a child, so he doesn't know everything. So there's an innocence still.
Especially you're like, oh right, his parents, and it's the wartime, and he's separated from his parents, and surely there's a lot going on there as a child, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a very important point, that we have to remember that he's relatable because there's a war going on. Bombs have been falling. Him and his 3 siblings, and by the way, if I remember correctly, the average family size at that time in the 50s and 60s was 4 children to a family. It's far less now, of course. So he's got this, he's the third in the birth order, right? And they flee from the city to the country. They're scared. They're being separated from their parents, probably for the first time in their lives, being sent to a distant relative's home who they've never met, to a part of the country they've never been before. You can just imagine the fear that they were holding on to. And he's very relatable because he's acting out with that fear. That's why I find him relatable. He seems the most realistic and natural of the children. Right?
That's right.
The other thing I like about him is that, we all sort of sentimentalize our families, right? But anybody that's raised a lot of kids, first of all, they know every kid is different, right? But there's no guarantee the kids are going to like each other, let alone love each other, right? Lots of families have enmity between siblings, right? They fight a lot. And you could just hear from the opening scene how disagreeable Edmund is with the rest of his siblings, with his other siblings. And to me, that makes him very realistic, very human, very childlike. He's third in the birth order, so he's trying to get attention. We know there's lots of kids in our families that act out negatively in order to get attention from their parents.
I'm third of 4, just like Edmund.
Oh, there you go.
And look at me in drama and theater. It's like, yeah, it's part of the makeup, it seems.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of how the story progresses, this relationship between especially the two older ones and how they seem to want to put Edmund in his place at all moments. And partly because this rich backstory that hangs behind it is that Edmund is a pest and he's continually disruptive and he's chaotic and he won't stay in line. And older brother Peter's trying to be like, Dad's not here, Mom's not here, we gotta keep in control.
He's
right?
hard to control.
How do we deal with this guy? And yet he finds all these moments of cruelty. Why? What's the psychology for Edmund to
moments of cruelty,
to pester?
like pretending he's never been to Narnia.
Exactly.
And Lucy's just making it up. Like, oh, that part gets me.
Yeah.
It's so mean. Like, it is mean.
It is so mean. Yeah.
Like, no, she's great. Like pretending someone else is crazy and you have the exact same experience of them. It's true.
Yeah.
Oh.
And the dynamics, I also think, between Susan and Peter. So, because they don't have their family, I think Edmund also envies Peter a lot because we hear a lot about how Edmund wants power, correct?
Right.
So, looking at Peter and Susan kind of playing mom and dad for Edmund and Lucy. And I think,
very good point.
I think Edmund is just envious of, the position that they're in and how it's unfair for him. He doesn't get to be in control. Because,
such a good point.
Yeah, because he craves power, and I think it's also interpreted that it's a bad thing to want power. I think it can go both ways.
Wanting empowerment is good. And agency and ability to choose for yourself is always these are good things. I love what you said though, like with older siblings, like, they get to be de facto mom and dad replacement. The older siblings are responsible and in charge. And, even doesn't he say at one point to Peter, sort of like, all you care about is your looks or something. Like, sort of, and stop talking like mother, I think he says to Susan. And, these different, like, slights,
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just like, it's the classic, like, well, mom and dad aren't here, so you have to listen to me. It's like that kind of.
Totally.
So
totally.
Yeah, and it's really important for the story that he captures that so well. And it's interesting to me because Lewis didn't have kids, and he sort of says, I didn't really like children, or at least that's the fault in myself that I didn't have this affection for children the way normal people should. And so to be able to do that despite kind of his own character, I think is an interesting intervention. Wow, like, how do you get that unless you have kids? Like, I got 6 kids and I can see all this stuff playing out year by year, these relationships as we're talking about, but he did it without knowing that. And I think some of it comes back to his experience as a child in the school system, watching these priggish bullies, as it were, and maybe that's the sort of training that Edmund is growing up into. This is how you act. You have to put on airs. You have to look like you know what's going on. There's always this sense of him always rising up and saying, I know what really is happening, and I'm above all of this nonsense that my younger sister is going on about. But really, he's kind of has that meeker side to him when he meets the queen and those sorts of things.
Right. He's like, stop going on about that, and let's go to the witches. Let's go to that castle over there instead. And it's very like, like, follow me. I'm the leader. And. Yeah,
I was just thinking that you're right, he didn't have children of his own, but 3 children did come to live with him between 1941 and 1943 during the Blitzkrieg.
Yes, true.
And he says that he observed them. That's how he learned about childhood, was observing those 3 girls that came to live with him. And I could just imagine as an academic, him taking notes and observing them and keeping notes and using them when he wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe over those 5 years that he culled those notes from observing those children, and we see that in the story.
Yeah. I just one other note to that, and that's very true. He writes children well even outside of this story. So one of his later stories, Till We Have Faces, it's about the Greek myth, Cupid and Psyche. He thought I think I want to rewrite this and get it right. This scene where the lantern is opened up and the Psyche sees the god and is banished forever. He wanted to rewrite that whole thing. So in that story, he puts another fictional land called Glome, and in it he places this family with these kids. And my point is not to go through the whole story of that, but to parallel between what's going on here. He captures kids perfectly. He just seems to know how to get at those, the innocence, the pretense, the coming of age, the problems that are all related to your siblings, all of these pieces. So Edmund's character is parallel to someone like Redival in that story, Till We Have Faces, and she's this brat as well.
And it was Ian, one of our past guests, who sort of brought up that in the books, Lewis adds commentary about the kids' behavior. Like Lucy, what was it? Lucy locks herself in a wardrobe, but she knew better than to do such a thing, right? And I just love how he's sort of commenting on that the kids' mindsets as they do things. It's kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah. Well, and there's more on that for Edmund, too. He gets into the psychology, not editorializing, but really bringing us to this moment where he becomes meek in front of the queen. In other words, his whole posturing has fallen away in the scene where he's terrified now. What's this person going to do to me? And we can go into that more later. But I just think he is a child, so there's an innocence there, and yet Lewis seems to capture that really well.
Yeah, let's talk about his encounter then with the witch. And I just thought of a question that I never actually thought about before, which is interesting, despite being familiar with the story for years now. Is there something particular about Edmund that made him susceptible to the witch's promises and temptations, or would any of the Pevensie children succumbed just the same to those exact temptations? And it's sort of interesting, you don't want to overly psychoanalyze fictional characters, of course, but is there something set in motion that, Edmund's the one. If anyone's gonna go with the witch, it's him. Whereas Lucy or Peter or Susan would have saw right through it. I don't know the answer to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, if I could just take the first stab at this. Let's not overlook the obvious. When he lands in Narnia, he's tired, by his own admission, and he's hungry, which means he's hangry. Anybody that's had kids knows how irritable they are when they're hungry. So their defenses are down. They're weak, right? They're susceptible. And the witch exploits that weakness very quickly.
Right. And Lucy, surely Lucy's tired and hungry too, but she seems to act almost like a grown woman when it comes to affairs.
Right, but she's been fed by Tumnus before she meets the witch.
so excellent point. Didn't even think about that. So
she was less hangry
when she met the witch. Right?
Yeah, but I think that's a really valid point, and I think that's the reading that makes most sense. He's ill-tempered, and this goes beyond just the surface level of being hungry, but I think that's part of it. It's actually a comment on his character, something about his virtue, or really his lack of virtue, that all the other children seem to have at least some baseline of, or a modicum of, versus Edmund, who seems to be deficient. And that's kind of the thing that opens him up to this moment. Although what I would say is we don't have a picture of Peter meeting the witch, but you have this sense that he would have reacted and maybe fled or run away or challenged her. Whereas Ed is just paralyzed. He doesn't know how to posture. He doesn't know how to present himself. He doesn't know how to get out of the situation because that ill-tempered nature deep down.
And we can't help it. Let's watch that scene or read that scene and feel sorry for Edmund, because she's quite good at what she does. She's quite calculated. She's quite manipulatable. And it's then where I have the compassion for Edmund as an innocent child who's just being duped by this tyrant, Yeah.
And it goes to show, Edmund, compared to the queen, the witch, he's I'm still under her spell. She
imagines herself to be a queen, that's for sure.
I think putting Edmund beside the witch, it's very obvious that she's the evil and he's just immature boy, essentially, if you break it down like that, right?
Impressionable.
I think going back to when I played him, a word I always told myself for Edmund was power, right? I always had this, at the time, I was always like, Edmund has no power within his siblings. In Narnia, he and Lucy go together. He's older than Lucy. He tries to manipulate her with all of that, right? So I think he's mesmerized, one, by the witch, with her power, and also with the promises of making him Prince of Narnia, all of that, correct? So I agree. I think that none of the other Pevensies would fall for it, but while he does build up this big wall, I think he's maybe the most vulnerable of the children of the family, and I think she's able to tap into that and get in his stomach and find that vulnerability and take
vulnerability based on maybe insecurity, not knowing himself.
Absolutely,
fear, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's take a quick break, but let's dig in further to what does the witch offer him, and perhaps dig deeper too in what you just brought up, Jacob. You are listening to Telling the Story, a podcast by Ninth Hour Theater Company dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture. Special gratitude goes out to Nigel Harris of Bare Bones Studio. For more information, go to barebonesstudio.godaddysite.com. That's Bare Bones Studio. It's with great joy that we record this podcast in an intimate setting where genuine conversation can take place. Thank you to Bare Bones Studio. And now, back to the podcast. And we're back. And we're going to keep digging into the role of Edmund and the nature of his character in the story. And we left off with him encountering the White Witch, and of course, what does she offer him, and also what are some of these motivations, like fear, insecurity, not knowing yourself. And I loved what you guys were saying, that it's likely that it really is only him that would respond to the witch in that manner due to character and due to the fact that he was hungry, and stuff.
It's not just character, though. I mean, we train up our children. We equip our children to navigate through a moral universe, right? To understand the difference between right and wrong and good and bad. And children learn differently. Some catch the lesson very quickly. Others need to learn the hard way, like Edmund. But there's this difference between children and how they learn and how much they learn and the quality of what they retain and all the rest of it. So maybe he was less equipped to deal with somebody like the witch than his siblings.
That's a compassionate, generous way to look at it, in fact, because children can only get what they get, right, from the people in their life, the environments they're in, and stuff like that. So it is a rather more complex way to look at it, right? Like not equipped, right? Rather than necessarily sort of like lacking because he's just so horrible and vile. It's like not equipped to deal. And I like that. That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think you said something very useful earlier, Charlie, when you talked about compassion that the audience or the reader often feels for Edmund at this moment. And it's tangible because it's probably one of the scarier moments, in my view, in the entire book. I know the stone table is really kind of frightening or shocking for a lot of people, but from the perspective of a child, that encounter with this witch there's usually a strong response. And part of it's because you see in miniature this manipulative boy put up at a grand scale with the queen, because she does the same thing to him that he's been doing to his younger sister, and yet this time it's for real. And there's this shocking moment where he feels, I forget what the words here, something like he thought he was done for, or he knew it was over, and right at that moment the queen switches gears and says to him, "Oh dear boy, I see that you're cold and come." And it's this really crazy version of him waxing large in. And I just think we do need to have that compassion, or at least usually the audience responds that way, because I think if you were brought in front of a royalty in that way and treated, it's pretty frightening for a child,
Yeah, especially one that seems sort of unhinged and like unpredictable, and yeah. And it's interesting, like she's all like like she gaslights him basically. And
Exactly.
it's just like you feel for him. He's totally being duped. We all know she's the White Witch in the story. We know she's reigned Narnia now for 100 years because we're familiar with the story, but he doesn't know that. He never does. Every time we do the show, he just never knows.
He never knows.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that when we see somebody getting their comeuppance, we usually respond positively. Like, he should get whacked. He's been treating his sister poorly. And yet, when the moment comes, when the manipulation comes, we don't feel that way. We think, oh no, he's in for it here. This is not good news that he's encountered this person. So that's what's very fascinating about Lewis's capacity to weave together these two characters that are very alike, and yet help the audience to see that Edmund is a character to be pitied and someone to cheer for rather than someone to look for the comeuppance. And it's a really strange moment for the audience, I think. Anyways,
like, we want redemption. We don't want vengeance.
Right.
We don't want him to get his just desserts. We want we want him to grow. Yeah.
I was just going to say that's interesting what you brought up about him facing the White Witch, because she's the White Witch, and white tends to be the color that's associated with innocence, with purity, with goodness. But behind that, she's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Behind that, there's pure evil. So she, in a way, that innocence that is presented through her costuming or through her appearance of white as the White Witch, that behind that is that evil, and that reflects beyond the surface of what Edmund had in his heart.
Yeah, exactly. They're both sort of characters that are inside out a little bit.
That's a good way of putting it.
But Edmund's not. He's a child still. He's an innocence, and Lewis wants us early in the story to still cheer for him, rather than the whole time to be like, when is he going to get paid off for treating Lucy this way? Like, it comes early enough that we can get on board.
But it's such an important moment, because the White Witch was a child at one time as well, right?
Exactly.
And just one incident or one event can change a child's life.
Right. It can put them on a new path, a different path.
Yeah, so we feel the danger that he's in as an audience.
Exactly.
Yeah, that spiritual danger, that existential danger, yeah. And, of course, the immediate and physical danger, of course. He could be turned to stone, after all, if he crosses her. I'm always... what do you think, the things that she offers him and presents to him, what do you think they represent in a sense? And we maybe touched upon it already. But I often think, I can't help but think, and I wonder if Lewis meant this, paralleling to this story in which Jesus is tempted by Satan, and it's three things he's tempted with. And I believe the witch more or less tempts Edmund with three things. But yeah, I don't know if that was a direct attempt to parallel the two, but what are the things that she tempts Edmund with, and maybe what implications are, why those specific things, I think. Yeah.
I think the very first one is this sense of just a desire to fill your belly. So the most base desires of your sustenance. But it's interesting that she begins by feeding him not the Turkish Delight, but by giving him true hospitality, warming his body with the drink. And there's this sense in which there's everything the witch does is twisted, but she's still obeying those primordial laws of hospitality. When you have a guest, you need to take care of them and treat them well.
Right.
And at the first, she just doesn't. She keeps thinking, this stupid boy, he's not getting anywhere, and she's about to kill him and toss him.
Right.
But then she realizes, oh, wait a minute, this is serious, and she switches gears and does this strange hospitality. So she gives him a hot drink. Why? Well, to help the manipulation set in, and he gets what, I don't know what it is, some your cafe mocha or whatever version you like, but it's sweet and it's enticing, and it takes his guard down, and then she asks him what he would most desire. So getting to those base desires, and that's sort of her first thing that I would say, to answer your question, that she offers him is
because she
what will satisfy
sit
you?
with me, get some warmth, a warm drink, right? And then asks him the second one is, what would you like most?
What would you like to eat? Yeah.
And then we're all disappointed by the answer.
I know,
because he could have anything.
He could have chosen a burger,
and he
did not.
I know, right? It's interesting. Were you going to say something, Jacob, or
No. I'm just listening. With what I remember, the third thing that she tempts him with is the position in her palace, correct?
Oh yeah, like the
To be a prince.
To be a
She
prince.
gets
yeah.
she gets the desires out of the way, and she tempts him with now something that power, and that really, when working on the character, I mean, when you're a kid, like, that's king, like, this as kids, our imagination is so extensive, and we see any royalty as favorable and something that we all crave, right? So going back to what you said, I think she did a really good job. I think she was very good at tempting Edmund with all those things. But what you said before, Todd, about the basic desires, that's something that's, that was really cool what you said. I hadn't thought about it like that with the basic necessities, essentially.
Well, and that, to your point, Charlie, that's what you got for Jesus, right? He gets the bread. Like, here, make these stones into bread, satisfy your belly. That's the first step, right? And you get that with the witch as a way into his mind.
Right.
And the Satan's kind of sort of doing the same thing. Of course, we've talked earlier about how the witch is this character. So,
And the second one was like, jump off this cliff and heaven angels will save you. Is that the second temptation of Jesus there?
Yeah, it's no, there's cities, right? All these cities will be yours, and then throw yourself down and really challenge God, something like that.
And death, right?
And He won't let you die, and your
so
angels.
The second one is power. I'll give you all these cities to govern over. Of course, they're not yours to give.
They're not
It's
yours.
The response, which is interesting because the White Witch is not the Queen of Narnia. They hail King Aslan, right? Ultimately, really. And so it's interesting that she's offering, you can be a prince. It's like, but at the end, Aslan makes him a king Edmund, which is better than prince, and it had that real legitimacy to it, right? Where the whole kingdom cheered, and her offer was quite nothing, quite fake.
Yeah, and by then he's deserving of it, right?
Yeah.
In that moment.
King
like,
Edmund the what?
Oh, gosh.
Was it?
The Just.
The Just.
There we go.
So.
Yeah, ironically and interesting. Yeah, the Just. I mean, for good reason,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and he lived his whole life unjustly.
Oh.
Right? Like, he had not given his sister her due all of his life. And he'd really not really understood what it meant to give someone their due. Should he give to this queen due reverence? No, he should run away. She's a witch. But he doesn't get it. And then he becomes the one known for that sense of justice, which is fascinating.
Oh, wow. Before we move forward with Edmund's journey and the rest of the arc with Edmund, because there's more to come with what he goes through, I wanted to touch on a bit too, like, I wanted to ask a heavier question of sort of why. I mean, Lewis wrote this after World War II. World War II is fresh on his mind. The Holocaust would have been fresh on his mind. Everything that went down, and he's creating this character, right, who rules with tyranny. She's got the captain of the secret police. She's got some of the trees even on her side. There's spies. There's a lot of fear. It's always winter in Narnia. It's never Christmas. There's nothing joyous. There's nothing worth celebrating. And I know we often talk about, well, why do some characters in the story, like the beavers, continue in their hope of Aslan and refuse to serve the witch? And then why do others, like Mr. Tumnus, out of, one explanation is out of necessity or survival, chooses to actually initially serve the witch, and of course he sort of snaps out of it and wakes up and gets punished for not coming through, and he gets turned to stone, spoiler alert. But I guess the question always remains is why in these times of trial, in these times of oppression and tyranny, why is it that often actually the majority goes along with tyranny? And in World War II, that certainly was the case. And it goes without saying that most even like Christian pastors and leaders went along with Hitler and Germany, and there were few that stood. And Bonhoeffer, of course, is a great example of someone who stood against what was going on and was kind of a lonely in that, I would say. I mean, he had some people. And yeah, I guess I always ask this deeper question, like, what makes some hang on and oppose it? You know, the Beavers, after 100 years of never seeing Christmas, what makes them hang on? What makes them not give in? What makes them not give up? What makes them not tempted by what might await them if they serve the witch? You know, why does Tumnus give in? I have some theories, but I'd love to hear what people's thoughts are on that. I mean, it just seems like the harder thing to do is to stand strong and persevere despite all odds. And it seems like most of us, humanity, are not quite up to that challenge in times of trial. It's a heavy question, I know, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one beginning to answer it is that Lewis is doing something to capture realistic pictures of people. You have the Beavers, who are sort of part of the underground resistance. You know, they believe, they have faith, but there's not many of them, and so you can't really act openly. There has to be a bit more of a secret society that's existing that knows that they don't have the power at this time to push back against the witch, but that there is coming a day when they can join in that final thrust. But there's also just a range of characters who are caught in the middle. Some people's circumstances make it difficult to do anything otherwise, and maybe Tumnus is part of that group. Again, these things aren't totally spelled out, so we're reading between the lines to some degree. But you can see that there's lots of people in conflicts who have maybe a gray response to evil. But is that the appropriate one for the time? Because in the end, you know, what he does at the end, standing against it, and he gets turned to stone as well, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this sense in which all of what is available to us, what is visible in the people who are making a resistance, the Bonhoeffers, these kinds of individuals, are only a part of the scene. And Lewis doesn't give us all of the other characters in Narnia that are also waiting in resistance. He's just carving a path through the snow, you know, with this one journey of these kids and the creatures they encounter, but they're always telling him, oh, these people are on our side, these people are also on our side. We don't get their portrait all the way through, but we do see in the witch's palace a bunch of stone. Right? Why? Because there was a resistance. And so even though we don't hear the stories like we in World War II, we don't know all the stories of people who stood against and were downtrodden, but we have this hope that people were there in the background.
Yeah, and it seems, I like what you were saying, like, too, it's like they know of each other, and so there is a bit of that comfort and strength in community and numbers and just knowing you're not alone. And I wonder if it's once again, I'm reading into the story, but it's interesting because it parallels real life in certain ways. And I wonder if Mr. Tumnus, if really the great thing was that he was just lonely and didn't have much community or friends, and so what choice did he have, right? I mean, I'm just theorizing, right? It's obviously not based on...
And he was sort of exposed, right? He was a known quantity. The wolves knew him. He had eyes on him, as it were. The Gestapo were after him, and in some ways that had limited what he could do in that world. So in some ways, I like the realism. I know it's a fantasy world, and yet he gets in the qualities that are very human.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to remember this is a story about 4 children. So I'll go back to this idea that children become what we train them up to be. And most of history, we have been ruled by tyrants. The democracies that we live under in the West now are very recent human innovations. So
and fragile.
Sure. So there's a lot of training up into authoritarianism. We learn to respect authority, we learn to fear authority. And I think at some level we internalize that authority so that it's not even necessary anymore. It becomes a kind of soft tyranny, right? Because it's been internalized. You don't need the heavy hammer, you don't need the police state. Like in the communist countries where you had secret police knocking at your door and arresting you for no reason at all, right? That it becomes internalized because you respect authority, you obey authority, you don't question authority because you've been trained up that way. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Right.
You see some of the cracks too in the tyranny that the witch oversees. Her sled gets wrecked on the mud when things start to melt. She's whipping the dwarf and trying to get him to work, and you recognize that tyranny isn't all it's cracked up to me.
There's absurdity.
There's absurdity.
You can laugh almost at certain things.
Right, but let's also not underestimate the fear of consequences of tyranny, right? I mean, people they die, they turn to stone.
Thomas's house gets destroyed,
right?
In fact.
Bonhoeffer, God love him,
got executed.
He was hanged, 2 or 3 days before the end of World War II.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of punishment and vengeance that goes on under tyranny that is fearful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's powerful. I mean, love can certainly motivate, and it has motivated people to do extraordinary things throughout since the beginning of time. But boy, fear certainly also motivates people, doesn't it?
Yeah, and tyranny we've lived under tyrannical regimes for most of history because it's effective. It works.
Right.
For a small number of people, who, like the White Witch, who are able to control vast numbers of people through fear and control.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a sharpness to tyranny. It's effective because you can do things right now. Whereas motivating someone through love is a longer scale. Like, you can transform generations through love, but you can completely demolish a city with one button, right? And there's something about tyranny's capacity to bypass the checks and balances that come with love, the complexities of people's lives. They're together. Why did you make this choice? Well, you have to explain yourself. Does a tyrant explain themselves? No.
Right.
They just tell you to do it, or you're getting the axe and someone else will. You know?
It's a lot easier to divide people and conquer them than
Right.
it is to unify them
Right.
and love them into community.
Right, because you're soliciting voluntary cooperation that could take a lot of time and a lot of discourse to even get to that point. Or, it's my way or the highway, and this is how it's going to be right now, and or else. It's definitely, you can be quite productive, but there's a morality issue there, despite the productivity of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting. I'm glad we could explore that bit. Yeah, it always makes me question things and stuff. Of course, that leads us moving forward in Edmund's journey too. So what's next for him? So he's essentially betrayed his siblings. No, let's not forget the moment where he first hears the name of Aslan. And I think we touched upon this in a previous episode, because it's an interesting moment. None of the kids had met Aslan at this point, and there's a sort of recognition, I guess, in their spirits or heart of what they're hearing from the beavers. The beavers describe Aslan a bit. Well, is he safe? They ask, and Mr. Beaver says, "Of course he isn't safe. Who said anything about safe?
But he's good."
Yeah.
And that's like, and then, of course, there's this beautiful part in the play where it's this moment, there's music, it's a bit of a moment. Each of the Pevensie children react to the name of Aslan, and their emotions are on full display. And, of course, the three other siblings have a very interesting, positive response to the name of Aslan, having never met him. And Edmund, also having never met him, has this dread, this horror. I'd love to hear what you have to think, Todd, and I want to hear what you remember about that too, Jacob, when you played Edmund.
Yeah, what strikes me is the contrast between Edmund seeing the witch and his experience of her at the beginning, and this scene you're describing when he has that sort of awkward terror, fear, whatever we want to call it, just at the name of Aslan.
Yeah.
So when he sees the witch, he doesn't really know what's going on. He's just confused. Who are you? I don't know. She's asking him weird questions about being a son of Adam. He has no respect for her. He doesn't understand what's going on. But with Aslan, it's very clear. He's never seen him, and yet he knows exactly who this is, that this is somebody to be feared. He didn't know to fear the witch. He knows that he's supposed to have a certain response to Aslan, which I think is an important juxtaposition for the story itself.
So you think he knew to have that response, or he involuntarily had the response?
No, it may be involuntary.
Yeah.
I just mean he was having the appropriate response for what where his character was at.
Right.
There was a wonder in the other child's mind. There was a love or this sense of strengthening that Peter felt. That was appropriate because he was in line with this good that George was mentioning. Whereas Edmund, because he's off a bit, he has this sort of reaction, but he doesn't have a reaction to the queen. He's just like, I don't know who this is, and then he's terrified when she starts beating him down.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. What's your recollection?
I just think Edmund doesn't like cats. No. I think it taps into the idea how, George, I guess in a way of what George was saying, but kids are easily influenced, right? Through meeting the queen, Edmund had, again, a strange, odd, I don't know what's going on encounter, and when hearing the name of Aslan, I don't think Edmund even knew why he was feeling that. He just was, and something I wish I went back and did differently was when I was saying that line, I said it like I knew the guy, like Edmund had met him. But to your point, he hasn't in that moment. So I think when I think he's feeling this, but he's so, and that's why I love him so much. I love Edmund. You just look at him and go like, oh my God, you have no idea what's going on. And it's same for all the other siblings, but for Edmund, he's again relatable. He is the one out of, it's like that saying, 99 people in a room, one person. Like, he basically represents the idea that not everyone's going to think the same thing. Ooh, correct?
That's a good point, yeah.
And while Aslan is great and the witch is bad, and we come to find that out in the conclusion and whatnot, but right. I think Edmund is a good, I think with Edmund's opinion, I think it just shows that in our society, in that society at that same time, people were so confused they did not know what was good and what was bad, right? So I think Edmund just represents that that fine line between they're saying that he's good, I'm feeling this way, and I met the witch, just confusion, right? So.
That's a great point. Yeah, not everyone feels the same way when they hear the word God.
Or my gosh.
Or when they hear the word freedom.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's totally, everyone's going to respond differently.
And what I get super focused on is people are so quick nowadays to go, wait, why do you think that? Or like
right.
to shut you down.
Right.
And
wait, why don't you think like everybody else?
What? You don't like so I think while it's obvious that Edmund's just unclear of everything, I think in that moment C.S. Lewis did a very good representation of mirroring what was going on in the actual time and society that they came from beyond the wardrobe, obviously, in real time, that people just were, they didn't know what to believe, essentially, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Especially in times of crisis, you're going to have people believing completely different things. Yeah,
and essentially, the witch was, with the idea, with her feeding him the Turkish Delight, she's essentially feeding him lies.
Ooh.
Right? So he's getting this gut feeling from hearing this after she had just fed him, clothed, all of that, and he's just, so.
Right. No, that's interesting. Yeah, like if you spend like 5 days with people and everyone hates radishes, you might, and you're an impressionable kid, you might come away also hating radishes. That's also an interesting phenomenon, I think, as well, right? Like everyone I know hates hates that movie that just came out. Therefore, I think I hate it too.
Yeah,
like even though you don't actually hate that movie, that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's been conditioned. And it's actually sort of a magical potion, this Turkish Delight. It's not just Turkish Delight. There's something to it that gives him this sense of wanting it again and again and again, and it drives him forward. But when he's in that scene and everyone's hearing of Aslan, you get that sense he's been conditioned by this encounter that you were mentioning with the witch to have this disfavorable response, and it really is the trigger point for him to leave. After he hears that, he just doesn't want to hang out with the beavers anymore. I don't want to hear people talking about Aslan's escapades. It just bothers him over and over, and he slips out the door.
Right. And that's his he goes back to her castle, and it doesn't go well after that for him, but you still feel sorry for him. You still feel bad for him because they're having such wonderful, like a nice meal with the loving beavers, and Father Christmas is about to come too, and and he misses out on all that. So you do feel for him still as like a kid who's missing out on good stuff, Yeah. So what happens next? Well, I mean, so he's betrayed his siblings. Eventually the witch turns on him, and of course So what transpires that the witch thinks she gets to kill him? Why does the witch believe she gets to kill Edmund? What's that about in the story? Like she says she has the right to, according to, well, why?
Yeah, it's this sense of having betrayed her siblings by bringing them into the world and essentially giving them over to her. This agreement that Edmund has with the witch that comes out, that he's made this official agreement, and it's binding on him and therefore binding on the others. And now they're all in a bind as a result. And so she captures him and holds him hostage as a result of that. So he eats the Turkish Delight, which is sort of the sign that he's now under her,
like a covenant, almost
under
a
her
spell.
control or spell.
So she's like, well, I get to kill him now. That's because he broke the covenant with her, or he betrayed his siblings.
Well, just that he's now under her power. So
Right.
she can do whatever she wants with him. And really the thing to do to leverage her position is to threaten to dispose of him or kill him. And so there's this sense in which she feels completely justified under the old magic. You know, we were talking about the magic.
The law says something about a traitor has to...
A traitor belongs to me, and therefore Aslan's like, well, okay, I guess I'll substitute myself to take over that claim.
Okay.
But there's a sense in which she owns him, and,
Right.
and we have to deal with that to some degree.
So when she says the traitor, he's a traitor to her? Or she's sort of getting on the point that he betrayed his siblings.
He betrayed his siblings.
And that you just can't stand for that, Aslan. Like she's sort of trying to get him to put down the law.
That's right. In
Kind of thing.
in that scene with the Turkish Delight, she says to him, bring them to me, this kind of thing. And he says, okay, I'm going to do that. So then he goes and tells they're at the Beaver's house, and he betrays their location, what they're doing, so that they can go and raid them and go after them. So that's the kind of... It's a little clunky, actually, in the book, but the point is still made quite clearly that his heart has turned and has joined her side willingly, that he willingly joined her side.
Right.
And
that's the treachery,
and
actually.
Yeah,
that
the
she's
treachery
holding him to. Okay.
against his siblings, to disclose their location, to bring them into Narnia against their will, to give them over to the queen or the witch, if you'd like, is the major sin.
Wow. So she's like acknowledging she's the bad guy in a sense, and he's betrayed good things.
Well, she's just manipulating the law that has been put in place, as it were.
Okay.
She
natural law, right?
The natural law, and saying, look, these kids broke it. This is your law. I didn't make it. You made it, Aslan. So you have to come to terms with this. And look at this guy. He came into this world. He freely gave them up. It was his own volition. It wasn't me.
Okay.
And so he says, okay, well.
And she'd benefit because the prophecy wouldn't be fulfilled now too if she kills him.
Right.
Because there's supposed to be 4. So that's probably her motive.
That's
her
her
calculating motive.
Exactly. And you see it with Satan in the garden. That's his point too. He wants to corrupt what God has made. How can I do this? Well, if I get them to eat of the only tree they're not supposed to eat of, it will wreck the plan and corrupt everything. And so that's sort of her own motivation.
I think to stretch the allegory a little further too, the biblical allegory is that there's the Judas element, right? That Judas betrays Aslan, or Judas betrays Christ. And remember, Judas spent as much time as the other disciples following Jesus,
yes,
loving Jesus. And the reasons that he betrayed Jesus, we speculate on. Some of them remain a bit mysterious, but they don't have to be clear and rational and logical, right? The point is he made a choice.
That's
And
right.
in a moral universe, it was the wrong choice, right? And you pay for that. And same thing with Edmund. He made a choice. It's that choosing between life and death. Remember, he chose the queen, who had destroyed Charn, created a lifeless world, killed her own sister. This is not a good person, right? But he chose her over his siblings and Aslan and everything that Aslan represents.
Right.
And
which in this story is black and white.
Right.
Like it's not
It is
vague.
But in many human circumstances, it's black and white too. People make a choice between good and bad, between God and mammon, between right and wrong.
Right.
Between Judas and Christ.
Between serving the tyrant or loving their family.
Right.
Or whatever. Yeah. Huh. Right. Huh. Yeah, okay, so he's up for grabs now to die. and and Aslan, of course, has a plan, and we talked in one episode about how it's so mysterious that Aslan goes off with the White Witch to discuss things further, but we don't hear what is said. And then he also later talks with Edmund off to the side as well. We also don't know what it said. And we were talking about, was this last time you were here, Todd? We were talking about this? Yeah. We're talking about how it's interesting that after they get back, right? After Edmund and Aslan get back to the group, it's just all said and done. And, hey, Pevensie siblings, here's your brother.
That's right.
And, yeah, you want to comment on that moment and why it's important in the story?
Yeah, I think it's, again, as I said last time, sort of the central piece of the story, the stone table cracking, the resurrection, but all the pieces around that, this sacrifice that's being made on behalf of the brother. Surely there's lots of other sins in this Narnia world, but really we're just given, as I said, that one route through. So we're getting the highlight sin, the major one that's come through, which is this betrayal by Edmund. And it's important that the witch gets to claim on this natural law that he belongs to her, because otherwise there's nothing for Aslan to conquest. Like, there's nothing to give. If it's just, he just made a mistake, it's fine, let it be. She has an actual claim. And so Aslan has to go and deal with this. And as I said last time, I believe the mystery of it, doing it off stage, is sort of important for the audience, because we don't know exactly what is said, but it's very clear what is done. That there is a pact that is given, my life for his life. Your brother is free from his guilt in this betrayal, and he is immediately restored to them. These are all important theological ideas if you're thinking as a Christian about what's going on, and that's why he puts them so black and white in the story.
Right, and Aslan makes it clear that he's good with Edmund now.
That's right, and don't bother. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Is sort of the way that Aslan says it. Like, it's all said and done. This sense of forgiveness that has been bestowed on him. Obviously the work hadn't been done to achieve the forgiveness, if you like.
That's interesting, isn't
he's
it?
able to say it based on his own word or his own character that I'm good for it, like a tab at a bar,
Right.
Like, I'll pay for it. I'm going to drink now. The forgiveness is given, but the tab will be paid. And she sort of says, remember in the story, she's like, well, how do I know you're going to keep your end of the bargain? And he roars at her, or some different people have done it in different ways, but I think that's a really lovely capturing of I'm good for my word.
How dare you?
This irony of the witch, like, you're not good for your word. All you say is lies. How dare you challenge me? And yet,
thank you for remembering that. Yes, he does roar fiercely at her when she questions his word.
That's right.
Like, how dare you question when I say I'll do it, do you remember that moment, Jacob, when you played Edmund and you got restored in relationship to your siblings?
I'm not gonna lie. I'm trying very hard to remember right now. I think I remember. It was Peter. I think he just put his Peter, the actor. Graves.
Yes.
I think he just put his arm on my shoulder.
Peter played Aslan.
Yes. Peter put his arm on my shoulder, and I think he bowed his head at me, and I remember he motioned me towards the siblings, but
right. It was simple, right? It was
very simple. Very simple, but simple can go a long way, right? Mm-hmm. So, to your point, I think it's in such a complex story like this. I think the moment of just what's said is said. It's done. Just go, And I think, if I remember correctly, if that's how we portrayed it, it speaks volumes. Simplicity can speak volumes. So, and it's, I remember the emotion that I was tapping into, which was just kind of guilt, you know? You're kind of like, yeah, this is all kind of my fault, you know? So,
Right.
and
Right. Interesting.
yeah, and the chemistry between the siblings and I for that production was very, very good, and I was very fortunate enough to work with all those incredible actors that, like, even when, you know, we weren't talking, Aslan was saying something, the looks we all exchanged could, like, louder than words, essentially. So, yeah, it was just like what I said earlier, stage B, you know, there's the beginning, the end, and the middle, and that was kind of the middle for Edmund, kind of being like, hey, what just happened? What did I just do? I feel bad. I got
fresh start, like a new beginning, but so much work ahead kind of thing.
Yeah, fresh start.
Yeah,
by Aslan needing to do this.
Right.
This is my fault. This is on me.
Right.
You know? So it
right. I remember it being a touching moment, and especially when the sisters forgave Edmund, and then Peter was the last, and of course he also did.
He went down the line, correct?
Yeah.
All the siblings. Yes, I remember that. Yeah, I remember.
It was touching.
Yeah, no, it really was. And I mean, it's an extremely powerful scene because it also insinuates that family will always be there for you, you know?
Yeah.
So,
it does give that hope.
And Peter is a great representation of family members not always being able to just on the fly be like, I forgive you. Like, it's hard, right? What Edmund's character did was extremely damaging to some, so it takes time, and it takes time to heal. So it's a whole thing. It's a whole
definitely like that. Yeah, it'd be too simplistic to be like, that's the end. You know, like
well, it's like it makes you think. Yeah,
it
makes you think. Does he carry not even does he? You know, he carries this with him for like ever. You know.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Moments as kids, what happened to us? Like, what do we bring forward with us through our lives that change us and motivate us?
For sure.
I think he does carry it forward. But one thing is quite clear in the way it's presented is the forgiveness is immediate, and the character change is immediate as well. So he is this brat, and he's cruel, and he's nasty, and he's spiteful, and that's just gone.
Like the forgiveness just melted his...
It just changes him. Now, it doesn't mean he's perfect, agreed, but it is very clear and stark in his behavior, especially as you see him in the other stories, right? He is a different person as a result of this. In that reunion, which is, I think, again, a classic theological note that Lewis is striking there for people, that it's very clear the difference between being forgiven. And yes, you might feel moment to moment, I was a bit of a guilty, but there's that complete transformation of character that's going to go on in a new direction.
And I love that you said that the work hadn't even been done yet
to
pay for that. Like it's an interesting turning it on the head. Like usually it's like, I'm forgiven because I know something has been done, but in this case it hasn't. It has yet to be paid. It's yet to be done. And and it's also interesting. There's this saying for those for he who has been forgiven much loves much, and it makes me wonder too. Like Edmund is to almost be. It's almost like you can almost picture him going on to be like a real champion of justice and love. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, George or Jacob, in Act 2 later on, is there not a time where the older brother Peter is discouraged and it's Edmund that actually encourages him and let's not give up? I could be just making it up, wishful thinking, but I thought that was at a later battle scene or something. But I could be wrong.
Edmund encourages everyone to fight for what's right at the end.
Okay.
Peter, I don't think it was Peter was incredibly vulnerable or upset, but it was right before the battle happened, and I believe they had either their team had shrunken or something, but it was Edmund. I remember I jumped on a box.
That's right. People were turned to stone, right? And then Edmund breaks the witch's wand. Yeah. Really, which changes the game. But it's Edmund who encourages to go. Yeah. Right? Because he receives that dagger that he never got. Yes. Yeah.
It's an exceptional moment. It's really important for his character because that's how the arc completes. he's the one that, no, he's the one. He's not totally the one, but he's the one who breaks the final spell. He was the first one to fall under the spell. So I think Lewis is getting that all the way around.
Yeah, I love that. It's like full circle.
Full circle.
Right, and which is the outcome or the consequence of obeying good authority.
Exactly.
Right, that's the modeling that Aslan in that story gives, that there's also good authority that contrasts very vividly with bad authority, with the tyranny of the witch. We have this modeling of that forgiveness can give new life, transformation.
And we're certainly going to talk more about that on our next episode, where we dig deeper into sacrificial love and just and the transformation that can happen through that, and more talking about the significance of the children in the story, and digging into so many things deeper than this. And we got to this great place with Edmund's arc that I feel so good about it. And I just thank everyone here for their contribution to digging deeper into just everything that is Edmund and everything that is Turkish Delight. I think it's important to say we got some better understanding on that one too. But I just want to turn it over for some final thoughts on this topic of tyranny, this topic of redemption, this topic of temptation, this topic of forgiveness, betrayal. Any final thoughts, George?
Yeah, I just want to make, we should get this verified, but one of our cast members who's Turkish told us that, because the topic is Turkish Delight tonight,
that's right.
that the name Aslan in Turkish means lion.
Right, that's right, she did say that. That's right. Yeah, thanks for that reminder, yeah. Jacob, any final thoughts on redemption, on Edmund's character, on, all the things we talked about tonight?
I think redemption is not easily achievable, and I think Edmund is a character who demonstrates that for those who are willing to put what they've done behind,
right,
that's the only way you can have a redemption, by moving forward and just essentially forgiving yourself, right? So
well said. And Todd, last words for you on this subject matter.
Yeah, I think Turkish Delight in the story and Edmund really talked to us about the sense of being enslaved to the desires of our hearts, the passions of our bodies even. And it's really lovely what Lewis has done to carve this path out. He is beholden to himself. He has no capacity to make a difference, and yet this intervention from Aslan really frees him and gives him the liberty to live, as we said later, as a king of justice rather than being enslaved by his own passion. So I love this character, as you guys have all said, and definitely worth rereading to capture that again.
Yeah, and worth seeing the play.
And worth seeing the play.
Well, thanks, Todd, for joining us again this second time. It was so great having you.
No, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
Jacob, great to have you with us too. What a treat. 5 years ago, you were in this show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And George, as usual, great co-hosting with you.
I enjoyed the discussion so much.
This has been Telling the Story, a podcast dedicated to exploring faith, spirituality, arts, and culture, hosted by Ninth Hour Theatre Company, located in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for joining us for our first podcast series discussing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. You can listen again to this and all our podcasts through our website, ninthhour.ca. That's number 9th-hour.ca. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is performing live in Ottawa, Canada at the Shenkman Arts Centre in the East End, December 14th to 17th, and the Meridian Theatres at Centrepoint in the West End, December 19th to 23rd. For tickets and showtimes, visit our website, follow the links in the description, or go directly to the theater's website or box office. Most shows sell out, so book your tickets in advance. If you've enjoyed our podcast and want to participate in similar discussions, please join us live in December for some pre-show discussions before some of the shows. Be sure to follow us and subscribe on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Until next time, remember, Aslan is on the move.